and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am a bad artist, and today I'm going to show you how to draw an apple. So stay tuned and enjoy. Bye! Alright, and to start, thank you for your support. If you're subscribed, you're an angel and I love you. So let's get right into it. So we're going to start with some base tones for our background. So I'm going with a nice brown color, something neutral, something I'd like to work off of later. Not going with anything too crazy because we're going with kind of a fine art scene today. Something really nice, something that's a good beginner lesson. So we're going to go through, we're going to make a nice table for our apple to sit on. You're gonna draw a line through your piece horizontally, hold it for a second, and Procreate will do the rest for you. It'll straighten out your line so you have a perfectly straight line, a nice place for your apple to sit on. We are making a wooden table for it to sit on. But first of all, we can't have a background with no dimension. So I'm going through and I am lightening up spots that I need to be lighter, because if we just have a flat surface for it to sit on, it's going to look flat compared to our drawing, and that's just not something that we want. So I'm just going through and highlighting part of our wooden table. Now I'm starting another layer, and I'm doing this because I want our table to have some texture. So while I root through all these menus looking for the texture I'm looking for, I'd just like to have a little talk with you. So our background is just as important as our foreground, and I'll tell you why. Because it makes the whole piece as one thing beautiful, cohesive, and have a nice rhythm to it. If we do not pay as much attention to our background as we do our foreground, the whole thing falls flat. It's like a big old boring pancake, and you just don't want that. So take the time, make a nice home for your drawing to live in. Make something that you would want to live in, because otherwise, why are you taking the effort to do everything in the first place? Just take those extra few seconds to make a really nice background. I used to not believe in backgrounds, and my art was a lot worse than it is now. So now we found our wood texture. Didn't like this first pass. The slats were too wide. Didn't like it. Looked like something out of the 80s, so we went and we did something a lot more subtle. So you almost have to zoom in to see, but it's very, very subtle, and that's something we want for our background, because while our background is just as important as our foreground, we do not want it to become the focal point, because it's not our focal point, it's our background, but it still deserves the same attention. So I've done this, I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm going to go through to my background again, grabbing one of my favorite brushes, the airbrush soft tool, because it makes such nice, feathery, soft, beautiful gradients. And I'm going through the back, and I'm almost making a stage for this apple. I'm going through, I'm making the background in some areas darker, working into the center. So I want you to imagine that there's a ball and it's getting smaller and smaller, and where that point is smallest, that's where we're going to put our apple, and that's where we want to put our highlight, because we just want it to blow up off the page. So as you can see, it almost directly looks like if I put curtains, you would think this is a stage, and that is exactly what I'm going for. So now that I've done this, we're going to create a layer. This layer we're going to call our apple base layer. And the reason we're doing this is because this is one of the most important parts of our drawing, so we want to make sure it's properly labeled. And as you go through the drawing, as you make more and more layers, you will find that some are not as important to name as others. This one, personally, I found really important to name, so I named it. So I'm going through and I'm getting my basic shape of my apple. And doing this, I'm doing gestures. And if you've never heard of gestures, it's this fancy art term for basically moving your hand freely and making the shape that you want to. So I kept moving my hand around in a shape until I got the right shape that I wanted. And then I filled it up with color. And I went through, it's hard to notice on the screen, but I went and I cleaned up some of my jagged bits. And you always want to do that so you have a smooth surface to work off of. I never talk about it on this channel because I don't find it very necessary, but I used to be a tattoo artist and there's always cleaning up to be done. Whether or not you think something is perfect off the surface, your artist is gonna find it. They're gonna find where that little teeny tiny area that needs cleaned up is, and they will clean it up. But we're getting off topic, and the next thing we want to do, we want to create our own layer for the stem. We're gonna create our own layer for these leaves. I did not do this the first time, and you'll see that I corrected myself and I made it on its own layer. And the reason it is so important to have things on their own layers is it makes a nice, clean, organized system for you to work off of. Because we are doing digital art, so we have things, these wonderful things called clipping masks, and I'm going to get all up into how those work in this video. So just working on my leaves, making sure they're the right shape that I want them. I got my stem. All right, we're ready to move on. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to name this leaves, and then I'm going to name my stem because these are important to me to label. And then I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to put it above my apple base. Layer 9 going above my apple base, and I am going to name this my shadows layer. And this is a very important layer. I always like to tell people when they are learning how to do shadows and highlights, imagine that there's a lamp in the sky above what you're wanting to work at. And imagine you're pointing that at what you're working on, and wherever the point is that you imagine the light is hitting, you want that to be your lightest point. And working to the back, you want to imagine where the shadows are and really box everything in. In realism, shadows and highlight are your biggest friend. And I will say that again, they are your biggest friend. Nothing works without them. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong with cartoons. I love cartoons. If you look at my channel, it's full of them. But when we're working on realism, we want to pay special attention to these spaces because it's what's going to make your apple pop off. All right, so you see me, I'm doing some gestures here. That's what that circle was. And I'm capturing where I imagine the light source is. I'm imagining my light source reflecting right there, right in that right hand section on my apple and radiating to the back. So we have our lightest point right there at the right upper corner, radiating down and illuminating, such a nice word, illuminating the rest of the apple. So I labeled my light source, and now I'm working into a new layer called my midtones. Your midtones are very important. So you're looking at an apple. You're looking, oh my gosh, so this apple isn't just red. It's got yellows, it's got greens, it's got oranges, it's got so many different colors. And when we're capturing our midtones, we are capturing that essence. So it's really important when you're doing your midtones to look at something real, look at a reference, and have fun, because ultimately you can really just play around back and forth with this, bounce between colors, see what looks to you to be the best, because honestly, This is a creative process. You can do any colors that you can possibly imagine. For my example, I'm working on and I'm teaching you, I want you to follow something that you can physically see, just as I am. But for the sake of fun and for the sake of creativity, if you want to make an alien apple that is purple, green, blue, like the whole rainbow, do whatever you want. Because the main thing is we want to get some other tones in here, and we want to really work on blending them. And when I say blending, what I'm doing here is I'm bouncing between a few different colors, and I'm doing a layer, then I'm blending it with another color, then I'm doing a layer, and I'm blending it with another color, and I'm playing with my paint. Like, this is something people do in painting a lot. You bounce between different colors, continually blending until you get the desired effect, and that's what's a creative process about it, is because it takes a while to achieve some of these effects. There are ways to cut through the red tape, so to say, and to get these effects faster. But when you're learning, it's really important to just have fun. So go ahead and play around with those colors and see what effects you personally yourself can achieve. Because you can look at other people's art and it's not going to look exactly the same as yours unless you are completely copying and pasting it. So, as you can see now, I'm working with a smaller brush to start getting some texture. So variety is the spice of life, and it's also the spice of art. It's just, variety is a beautiful thing to include in your art. So I'm having different strokes, different colors, just taking a bunch of different things and making them work together. Work variety into your apple, and then you're going to know something beautiful happen. So you're looking at my apple and you're really just concentrating on all those different tones as I was talking about. If you're looking at it now, you can kind of start to pick apart what I was talking about. But again, that's something that you need to experiment on your own and find out what works for you. All right, so time to work on something different. We're going to work into our leaves now. So again, we're grabbing our trusty airbrush tool, and I'm starting to put some small details into it, give it some form. And again, I'm looking at a reference. I'm deciding where I want to put my lines based off of, again, gestures. Just doing things in a nice organic fashion. I'm adding in my shadows. I'm adding in some highlights. And when we look at a leaf, it's not just a flat leaf usually. It's got some curves, it's got some shape to it. So I go through and I start to capture the essence of some of those curves, some of those shapes, and just, like I said, keep playing around, see what works. Because the beautiful thing when you're starting to really look at nature or starting to really look at an object closely, you find out that there's no straight lines in anything in nature. Everything's curving, everything's just really flowing. And it's important when you're working with something from nature to really capture the imperfections that are found in everything. And that's something I'm really stressing as I'm working on this. So I've got those two layers, and I'm pretty happy with them so far. But I'm still working on it. I'm still adding different colors. I'm still going to add some midtones later. I take a break at a certain point to work on something different for a bit, but my leaves are definitely not done. There are so many different things that you can do when you're working on something even this small, and I encourage you to keep working on little details like this until you are 100% happy with them. Just keep bouncing between your shadows, your highlights, and keep putting on layers until you get the desired effect this is a section of the video, or a section in any art video, where I can't really tell you 100% do this. It's really something that you just need to keep working on, because there's just no one solution for these kinds of things. I mean, there's helpful tips, but essentially you have to find your own way when you're doing things like this. And working from something, working from a reference is really the way to go. So I'm just still working through it, just still getting more shadows, more highlights, and then just going through and strengthening my little apple leaves as much as possible. So now I'm okay with that for a moment. I'm coming back with my apple, and I am strengthening more of my shadows, because you can always come back to things you've done. Don't think just because I bounced from one thing to another thing that I'm done with it. And you'll do this more as you're learning as well. So I'm in my stem now, and notice I'm still working on each layer individually with their own clipping mask, because the clipping mask keeps everything confined to one shape. And that is what keeps everything organized, crisp, clean, because we're making a crispy apple here. So I'm working on the stem, I added my shadows, I'm adding some highlights, and I'm defining a little bit with my smaller brush, but honestly, it didn't take much in the stem for me to be happy with it. I'm done with it, I'm stepping away from it. That's a done deal. I'm done with the stem. Now I'm coming back again to my apple, because you can never do too much when you're working on something. You're always going to come back to things and just pick out little, nitpick, find things that you want to add. So I'm adding some final highlights, and these are really just the creme de la creme, the icing on the cake. You want to add these for sure. Put their own layer, because just look at how much those 2 dots added to the photo. You wouldn't think it, but the proof is in the pudding. So here I am adding a little bit more of the highlight, and it just adds. So you can almost imagine that the light is just cutting across where I have my highlights. You see that line running through? That is where the money is, my friends. So we are happy with our highlights for now, and we're going to take a look at something else. So I'm coming in and I'm perfecting my shadows more now. I'm really happy with my highlights, so now we're perfecting our shadows. You got the yin, you got the yang. So we're going through and doing both, because one cannot exist without the other. So I'm looking at my apple and I'm pretty happy with it, but something about those leaves, man, I just need to come back to. So I'm working on my leaves a little more, because like in the apple, there's not just one green color in a leaf. There are several colors. There's some browns, there's some oranges, there's some yellows. Like I said, and I'll say this, I'll keep beating this point to the ground till I'm dead. Look at a reference. Look at something in real life. So, if I paused in that video for a second, it's because I'm really looking at my leaves and I'm looking at what irks me about them. So I figured it out, and I'm going through with a smaller brush and just really nitpicking at some of those edges and making things sharper, because I found out that in my mind the leaves looked a little too clubby, too much like club hands. So I'm coming through with a lighter color, and I'm really starting to define some of those fronds, because this will make it look sharper rather than round. The leaf was too round, wasn't happy with it, so came back. Never be afraid to come back to something you're not happy with, because you will put it out there to the world and you'll keep looking at it and you'll be like, gosh darn it, I just wish I had come back to that. So that's what we're doing here. We're avoiding guilt. We're avoiding later anger, so do the same. I guarantee you will not regret it. So here we go, adding in smaller details, and then just continuing to build, bouncing back and forth between a few different colors. And this is what I encourage everyone to do. Just keep finding your mojo till something sticks and you're happy with it. Okay, and I'm again pausing to just look at everything and assess what I need to do next. And I'm going to start working in some of those midtones I was talking about. So I'm going to do this and just play around with it. I started to really like this tan color, so I worked it in. And then I started to work in darker and darker colors. And that's a good point too. When you're working with midtones, you want to start from lightest to darkest, because you can build on those. If you do dark right off the bat, then again, for my tattooing days, you don't want to do dark first. You can go back from light, you can't go back from dark. So just a little tip there. And I'm just adding some details that I personally would like to see in my apple leaves. Like, I always like it when they have those little holes in them, so adding some of those. And again, look, I'm starting with my lighter colors and working to my darkest colors. So I started with a brown, light brown, went to a darker brown, then I'm going to black. And just look at how deep that effect is. So just a tip, start from the lightest and up with the darkest. And look at my leaves now. They're perfect. I'm happy with them. I'm taking a step back. I always encourage you to zoom out from your picture and take it as a whole and see if you're happy with it. And the only thing I see left to do is add a shadow underneath my apple. So I'm creating my own layer for it, and I'm working in my shadow underneath so it doesn't look like my apple's just floating, which it looked like it was. So apple has a home now, and I went through, decided that was a little too dark, so I went and lowered the opacity on it. And that's another great thing about Procreate is all the different options that you have as far as your layers go. So that's a done deal. I'm really happy with my apple, and if you've made it this far, congrats to you. Please subscribe, please tell other people about my channel, and I just hope you have a great day. And if you are looking to become a better artist, the only thing that I have to say to you is just keep trying. Don't give up. Don't give up because people say your art is bad. Art is subjective. There is someone out there who's going to like your art, and the first person that needs to be is you. I always put a signature on my art, even if I don't like it, but I hope that you like this piece of art, and have a nice day. Bye.